48 hours. That is how long the most powerful military coalition on Earth refused to believe what its own eyes were showing it. 48 hours in which the warnings arrived, were read, were folded shut, and pushed to the edge of the desk. 48 hours in which 250,000 men slipped through a forest every textbook called impassable. And when they finally tore out of the fog, no one, from the frozen foxholes to the marble halls of Versailles, was ready. This is the story of how Hitler's last gamble almost worked. Not because the Germans were stronger. They were weaker, poorer, hungrier, running on stolen fuel, on teenage boys and tired old men. It almost worked because of something far more dangerous than any tank. It almost worked because the men who were winning had already decided the war was over. That is the trap this story is really about. Not a failure of courage, a failure of imagination. The refusal to picture a thing you have already decided is no longer possible. Night, December 15th, 1944. 1st Army Headquarters, Spa, Belgium. One desk lamp burning. A man bent over a map, a cigarette gone to ash between his fingers, the tray beside him full. Colonel Benjamin Dickson, Chief of Intelligence for the American First Army. His men had a name for him they used behind his back. They called him Monk because he brooded like one. And for 3 weeks now, Monk had been trying to tell anyone who would listen that something in the German lines was moving. He had the pieces. Hospital trains pulling up behind the Rhine, long ones, empty, waiting to be filled. Tiger tanks riding west on railway flat cars. Fresh divisions vanishing from the radio traffic, going silent, the way an animal goes still before it strikes. The Germans held their radios in total silence. By day the supply trains hid inside tunnels, and only crawled forward at night. By the time the blow fell, they had moved 144,000 tons of supplies into that quiet forest, and almost no one on the other side had noticed. A German-speaking woman from Luxembourg, smuggled across the line by the resistance, spoke of pontoon boats and bridging gear being gathered near the river. Small things, all of them. But Monk had spent his life turning small things into a picture. That was the job. That was the whole job. To hear the future while it was still only a whisper. On the 14th, he drew a red arc across the map, moved it once, and set it down over a single place. The Ardennes. That quiet, wooded, snow-choked hinge in the line where nothing ever happened. He looked at it a long time. Then he said, to no one in particular, that they were going to attack, and they were going to attack right here. He wrote it into his estimate. He signed it. He sent it up the chain, and he waited for someone above him to feel what he felt. No one did. And here is the cruelty of it. He was right. Every instinct in him was right. But 3 weeks earlier he had cried wolf once too often, warned of a blow that never came, and the men above him had quietly stopped trusting the officer who worried too much. That is the oldest trap in war. The one who sees the truth is the one nobody believes anymore. That same night, Versailles, France, 200 kilometers behind the line, in a palace built for a sun king, the mood could not have been more different. General Dwight Eisenhower had just been handed his 5th star, General of the Army. 3 years earlier, he had been a lieutenant colonel nobody outside the service had heard of. Now he sat at the top of the greatest army the West had ever fielded, and every map on his walls pointed one way, east, into Germany. Toward the end, he had earned a night off, and every man in that palace believed he had earned it. There was a wedding coming, his own orderlies, and Ike had agreed to stand as best man. There was scotch on the table, and there were cards. 6 months and 10 days since the landings at Normandy, and his armies had run all the way from the beaches to the border of the Reich. The reports on his desk said the same thing they had said for weeks. The enemy is finished. The enemy cannot attack. The enemy has nothing left. Only one senior American commander kept saying otherwise, a blunt, profane cavalryman named George Patton, who had a habit of being right in ways that annoyed everyone. But Patton was in the south, looking the other way, and his warnings blended into the noise. So on the night of December the 15th, the sharpest minds of the war looked at the same forest. One of them, an intelligence colonel nobody trusted, saw an avalanche about to fall. The others saw a quiet place to let tired men rest over Christmas. Both could not be right. The clock was already running. They simply could not hear it. 5:30 in the morning, December 16th, 1944. The Ghost Front. They called it the Ghost Front because nothing happened there. 80 miles of hills and pine and deep snow, held so thinly that a man could walk half a mile between foxholes and never see another soul. The units posted there were the walking wounded of the American Army. The 106th Infantry Division, green as spring grass, in the line for days. For days. Beside them the 28th, torn to pieces in the Ardennes Forest, sent here to bleed quietly and heal. These were the men Hitler had chosen to strike. Not by accident. He had picked the softest seam in the whole Allied front, and he had picked the week of Christmas to tear it open. At 5:30, the sky came apart. 1,600 German guns opened at once. The men in the foxholes woke to a horizon that was solid orange, to the ground jumping beneath them, to pine trees snapping like matchsticks and coming down in the dark. One soldier said later that it was not a sound at all. It was a pressure, a hand pushing the air out of your chest. Men bit through their own lips. A few, cut off and alone in the dark, simply froze in place and could not make their legs obey them. The barrage rolled over them for an hour. And when it lifted, they heard the second sound, the one that would live in their nightmares. Engines. Hundreds of them. The clank and squeal of tank tracks coming through fog, so thick a man could not see the soldier beside him. Out of that fog walked the giant nobody believed in. Dawn. The Schnee Eifel. Picture one of them. 19 years old, maybe 20. A rifleman of the 106th, for days off a troop ship, his boots still stiff, his hands so cold he cannot feel the trigger. The temperature is falling toward 20 below. His breath freezes on his collar. He has been told, over and over, that this is a rest sector, that the Germans are beaten, that he is here only to get used to the war before the real work begins. Now there are shapes moving between the trees, and they are not stopping, and they are not few. His sergeant is shouting. Someone is already screaming for a medic. The boy does the thing they trained him to do. He waits for the order to fall back, to hold, to be relieved, because that is how it works, because the tanks are coming and surely, somewhere behind him, someone knows this is happening and is sending help. He does not know yet that behind him, the telephones have gone dead. Somewhere in his pack there is a letter half written to his mother, the kind every soldier carries, full of small lies meant to keep her calm. He had told her it was quiet here. He had told her not to worry. In a few days he will be a prisoner, marching east through the snow in a long gray line. And that letter will never be finished. And for a long time she will not know whether he is alive or dead. 2 regiments of his division, the 422nd and the 423rd, more than 6,000 men, are already being wrapped in a ring of German infantry closing quietly through the woods. They will hold for 3 days, waiting for an armored rescue the maps promise, and that will never come. Then, out of ammunition, out of food, out of hope, they will lay down their weapons. More than 6,000 Americans surrendered at once. It is the largest mass surrender the United States Army will suffer in the entire war in Europe, and most of them have been soldiers for less than a week. Afternoon, December 16th, 1944. Eisenhower's headquarters, Versailles. The first reports reached the palace as thin, confused fragments. A probe here. Pressure there. General Omar Bradley had driven up that day to talk about something entirely mundane, the shortage of replacement troops. He was in the room when word came that the Germans were pushing hard in the Ardennes. Bradley shrugged it off. A spoiling attack, he said. A local thing, meant to knock them off balance. Days earlier, a British intelligence officer named Kenneth Strong had come to warn him in person that something might be building in exactly this place. Bradley had waved it away with 3 words history would not let him forget. Let them come. He had already decided the danger was exaggerated. He was so unconcerned that he would not even return to his own headquarters until the following afternoon. But across the table, Eisenhower had gone quiet. Something in the shape of it bothered him. Not the words on the page, but the geometry beneath them. Why there? Why the one place too rough, too wooded, too foolish to attack through? He looked at the map, and where Bradley saw a nuisance, Ike felt the floor tilt under him. He had spent a career learning to read other men's certainty, and Bradley's certainty was the kind that comes from wanting a thing to be true. He said, slowly, that this was no local attack. And that very afternoon, he began to do the one thing that would save the whole line. He ordered armor toward the Ardennes, toward two crossroads towns whose names meant nothing yet. St. Vith, and a little market town where 7 roads met, called Bastogne. It was the right call. But orders take time, and roads take time, and out in the snow, time had already run out for a great many men. December 17, 1944. The Bognes Crossroads, near Malmedy. Here the story stops being about maps. A column of American gunners, the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, was rolling south when it ran head-on into the spearhead of the German attack, an SS armored group under a young, cold-eyed colonel named Joachim Paper. There was a brief fight. There was no chance. The Americans surrendered, more than 100 of them, and were herded into an open field in the snow at the crossroads. And then, for reasons still argued over 80 years later, the machine guns opened up. 84 men died in that field. Some ran, some dropped and lay still in the snow among the dead, holding their breath while SS soldiers walked among the bodies and fired a pistol shot into anyone who moved. A handful lived by playing dead in the freezing cold for hours, and it was those men, half frozen, who carried the story back to the American lines. The news of Malmedy did something the general's maps never could. It ran down the line like electricity, and every exhausted, half-trained, half-frozen American boy who heard it understood, in his gut, a single new fact. There would be no surrendering to these men. There would be no giving up. If they were going to die out here, they would die with a rifle in their hands. Hitler had wanted terror to break the American line. Instead, terror welded it shut. The blackout. The 48 hours. Here is the mystery at the heart of it all. The one monk Dickson saw coming and no one else would. For more than 48 hours after the attack began, the American High Command was, in the most literal sense, blind. Bradley's army group lost communications with the First Army entirely. For 2 full days, the men responsible for stopping the greatest German offensive in the West had no reliable picture of what was happening to their own troops. They did not know which towns had fallen. They did not know where the German spearheads were. They did not know that whole regiments had already ceased to exist. Think about that. The attack did not nearly succeed because the Germans outthought the Allies. It nearly succeeded because for 48 hours, nobody at the top could see. The warnings had been dismissed before the battle. And once the battle came, the fog, the cut wires, the sheer speed of it, blinded the very men who had ignored those warnings. So why did they not believe? That is the question that haunts this story. And the honest answer is not stupidity. These were brilliant men. The answer is more human and more frightening. They did not believe because they did not want to. Believing meant admitting the war was not almost over. Believing meant that the boys they had sent to a quiet forest to rest were about to be overrun. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is not finding the truth. It is being willing to see the truth you have already decided cannot be real. The Germans understood this better than the Allies did. Their whole plan was built on it. They did not need to beat the enemy's army. They only needed to beat the enemy's certainty for just long enough to get their tanks across the river. December 22nd, 1944. Bastogne, encircled. By now the giant had punched a bulge 60 miles deep into the American line, and that bulge gave the whole battle its name. But the German timetable, so precise on paper, was coming apart on 100 frozen crossroads where small groups of Americans simply refused to move. None more famous than Bastogne. 7 roads ran through that little town, and the German tanks needed those roads. Inside, surrounded, low on ammunition, low on medicine, low on everything but nerve, sat the 101st Airborne and whatever stragglers had fallen back into the perimeter. The temperature hung near zero. Men without winter coats wrapped themselves in whatever the townspeople could spare. On the 22nd, four German soldiers came forward under a white flag, carrying a formal demand: surrender the town or be annihilated. It reached the acting American commander, General Anthony McAuliffe. He read it. He was tired, and it almost made him laugh. He said one word, and that one word became the answer sent back, typed out, official, to the German command. Nuts. The Germans, baffled, asked what it meant. An American officer explained that in plain English, it meant the same as go to hell. And Bastogne did not fall. December 23rd through 26, 1944. Then the sky did the thing everyone had been praying for. On the 23rd, the fog that had shielded the German columns finally broke, the clouds pulled back, and the sun came out over the snow. For 5 days the weather had been Hitler's greatest ally. Now it turned on him. Allied aircraft rose in their thousands and fell on the German columns strung out along the icy roads. Columns already coughing on empty fuel tanks, because the whole gamble had depended on capturing American gasoline that the Americans had burned rather than surrender. And from the south came Patton, the one man who had believed. He had wheeled an entire army 90 degrees in the dead of winter and driven it more than 100 miles in a handful of days, a maneuver his fellow generals had called impossible. On the 26th, his lead tanks broke through to Bastogne. The Bulge had reached its limit. Now it began, slowly, in blood and frostbite, to collapse. The aftermath. When it was over, in the last days of January, the cost was carved into a generation. The United States Army suffered somewhere between 75 and 80,000 casualties in a few short weeks, the bloodiest single battle Americans fought in the entire war. The Germans lost as many or more, and unlike the Allies, they had no one left to replace them. Hitler's last reserve, the final army he would ever build, lay dead and frozen in a Belgian forest. He had gambled everything on surprise, and the terrible truth is that the surprise worked. For 48 hours it worked completely. The giant walked out of the fog exactly as one lonely, discredited intelligence colonel had warned that it would, and the most powerful army on earth was caught with its eyes closed. What saved the line in the end was not the generals who had ignored the warnings. It was the 19-year-old in the frozen foxhole who would not run. It was the surrounded battalion that answered a surrender demand with a single word. It was the exhausted men holding crossroads whose names they did not even know, buying with their lives the hours their commanders needed to wake up. None of them knew they were saving anything. They knew only the men beside them, and the cold, and the next tree line, and the simple refusal to be the one who ran first. Monk Dickson was right. He was right the whole time. He simply had the misfortune of being right too early, and history has a cruel habit of forgetting the ones who tried to warn us. Somewhere in the records, his red arc still sits on that map, drawn 2 days before the storm, pointing straight at the place where the giant would come. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one, to the last cold crossroads and the last frozen field. If these men, the ones who saw the danger and the ones who stood in its path, touched you even a little, then stay here with me a while longer, and let us keep waking the pages of history the world was ready to let sleep. Because there is always another story waiting just ahead. Another winter, another gamble, another warning that someone, somewhere, refused to believe. I will see you in the next one.